We had a question about whether or not everyone is muted. I think you are automatically muted. If you raise your hand, I can give permission to talk, but we will have Q&A at the end. Let's see. Shelley, I think I am giving you permission to unmute. Is that working? Shelley, can you, oh, you want to stay muted? Okay. All right, there you go. Okay, it's 11 o'clock, so we will get started. I'm Shana DiCamillo with Center for Elder Law and Justice, and I'm just here to do the housekeeping, so I'll be going off camera shortly and passing things off to Bria and Lisa, who will be presenting on nursing home visitation and the holiday season. We will have time for questions at the end, and you can enter those questions in the box or raise your hand at the end and we can let people talk that way as well. The only thing that I wanted to mention was if you've registered for this webinar, we would like to use your email addresses to keep you informed about future presentations or events from CELJ. If you're uncomfortable with that and you would not like us to use your email, please just shoot me a message in the chat box and I will make sure not to add your email. Someone's asking about a virtual certificate. You should get, Lindsay, did you want to address that?
I was going to say you should have received a confirmation for this webinar, but if you also want to email me, if you're seeking documentation that you attended this as part of your role as an ombudsman, I'll put my email in the chat and you can email me directly so I can make sure that your regional program documents this.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to pass things off to Bria and turn my camera off. Okay.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Shana said, my name is Bria Lewis, and I am a staff attorney at the Center for Elder Law and Justice, and I will be presenting today with Lisa Newman, who is the director of the New York State Region 15 Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. And today we are going to discuss some key highlights from the new visitation guidelines and advocacy tips for residents and their loved ones. So before I get started, I just want to start with this disclaimer. It states that the following content is for informational purposes only, and it should not be interpreted as legal advice. The information contained may not necessarily apply to your specific case or situation. So if you do have any questions or concerns about your specific case or situation, feel free to give our office a call and we would be happy to assist you. So on November 12th, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, also known as CMS, released updated visitation guidelines for nursing homes. And on November 16th, the New York State Department of Health released a DARE administrator letter stating that all nursing home facilities in New York State should be following the current CMS guidelines. And these guidelines state that indoor visitation must be allowed at all times and for all residents. And importantly, facilities can no longer limit the frequency and length of visits for residents or the number of visitors that residents can receive at one time. Advanced scheduling of visits is also no longer required. And while you no longer need to schedule a visit, I still think that it's good practice to let the facility know when you would be visiting. For example, when I go to visit with clients in nursing homes, I still let the social worker know ahead of time of when I plan to visit, just so that the social worker is expecting my visit and that the resident is ready when we go to the facility. Now that visitation is allowed at all times, it's important that visitors are continuing to practice the core principles and best practices to reduce the spread of COVID-19. And this just includes wearing a face mask and practicing hand hygiene and continuing to social distance. Facilities are also required to screen all visitors who enter the facility for signs and symptoms of COVID-19. And facilities can also deny entry of visitors if they are exhibiting any signs or symptoms of COVID-19. And nursing homes that are in community levels with substantial to high spread of COVID-19, visitors are required to wear a face covering regardless of their vaccination status. And this is currently in effect in New York State right now. Governor Hochul issued an executive order that became effective on December 13th. And it states that masks must be worn in private places. And this applies to visitors in nursing homes. So while it's not recommended that residents who are on transmission-based precautions or quarantine receive visitors, they're still allowed to have visitors. And what transmission-based precautions means is it's just a heightened level of infection control. So that means in addition to the standard level of infection control and practices, when you would go to visit with a resident that is on transmission-based precautions, you would have to wear additional PPE, which would include a gown or eye protection. And before visiting with a resident that is on transmission-based precautions or quarantine, the facility should advise the visitor of the potential risk of visiting these residents. So in the previous guidance, it talked about indoor visitation during an outbreak, but now CMS has changed this to indoor visitation during an outbreak investigation. And an outbreak investigation is initiated when there is a new COVID-19 case among residents or staff. And while it's safer for visitors not to enter the facility while there's an outbreak investigation, residents are still allowed to receive visitors during this time. And similarly to when visitors are visiting residents that are on transmission-based precaution or quarantine, the facility needs to let visitors know of the risk of visiting during an outbreak investigation. And visitors still need to practice those core principles of infection prevention, including wearing a face mask and practicing hand hygiene. And when there's an outbreak investigation occurring, visitation should ideally occur in the resident room. Now that visitation is allowed at all times for all residents, compassionate care visitation is still allowed at all times. And there should be only a few scenarios when visitation would be limited to only compassionate care visitation. And CMS expects these scenarios to be very rare. I know many people wonder if they need to be tested or vaccinated in order to visit with a resident in a nursing home. And the answer is no. Visitors are not required to be tested or vaccinated or show proof of such in order to visit with a resident. And while it is not required, CMS does encourage facilities in substantial or high community levels of transmission to offer testing. And while they may offer you a test, as the visitor, you still have the right to deny the testing. And CMS does strongly encourage all visitors to become vaccinated when possible. And they also encourage facilities to educate visitors on becoming vaccinated. Now that we're in the middle of a holiday season, outings are a very important topic for residents and their families. And an outing just refers to a short leave of absence from the facility for less than 24 hours. So that usually includes going to a doctor's appointment or visiting with family and friends. Facilities are required to permit the resident to leave the facility when they choose. And if a resident does choose to leave the facility, then the facility should remind the resident and whoever is accompanying the resident to follow the core principles and practices of infection prevention, such as wearing a face mask and social distancing, and encouraging those that are around them to do the same. So there are a few scenarios for when a resident may have to quarantine after they come back to the facility from an outing. First, if a resident or a family member reports that they were in possible close contact with someone that had tested positive for COVID-19, then the facility would test the resident regardless of their vaccination status. And if the resident is not fully vaccinated, the facility would place the resident in quarantine. Another scenario is if the resident develops signs or symptoms of COVID-19 after they come back to the facility, then again, regardless of their vaccination status, the facility would test them, but then the resident would be placed on transmission-based precautions. And again, that's just a heightened level of infection prevention. Another scenario is if the resident was out of the facility for longer than 24 hours, then the facility may opt to test an unvaccinated resident, even if they do not have any signs or symptoms of COVID-19. And for unvaccinated residents, facilities may also decide to quarantine the resident based on a risk assessment. And that would be the facility conducting a risk assessment on a case-by-case basis. If there's some uncertainty that exists about the resident's adherence to the recommended infection prevention measures while they were outside of the facility. So the procedures are slightly different when a resident leaves the facility for longer than 24 hours. And if the resident is gone for more than 24 hours, when they come back to the facility, they would be managed as a new admission. And what that means is that if the resident is unvaccinated, then they would be placed on a 14-day quarantine, even if they tested negative upon coming back to the facility. However, for fully vaccinated residents and residents who are within 90 days of a COVID-19 infection, they would not need to be placed on quarantine. So CMS states that communal activities can still occur in the facility as long as residents are adhering to the infection prevention practices, and they encourage residents to continue to wear a face mask while in communal areas, regardless of their vaccination status. And some activities that they believe could happen while adhering to the core guidelines are book clubs, crafts, movies, exercise, and bingo. So these are all things that residents can be doing in the facility right now and still adhering to those core principles of infection prevention. So lastly, I just want to talk about if you are a resident or a family member and you ever have questions about your facilities procedures regarding visitation and outings, I would recommend that you request a copy of the facilities procedures. And always remember that whatever the facilities procedures are, they should still be in line with what the current CMS guidelines currently are for nursing home visitation. And lastly, on the slide, I have a few resources. So first, we have a guide, a blog that we wrote about the current nursing home visitation guidelines. We also have a fact sheet on our website that goes through some frequently asked questions that people may have about the guidelines. And this is something that you could go on our website and print out and take with you in case it's something that you need to reference. I've also included a link to the guides for both CMS and the New York State Department of Health Dear Administrator letter. And before I turn it over to Lisa, I just want to encourage everyone to participate in this survey, and I will put the survey in the chat for everyone. We would just greatly appreciate any feedback that you have. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, and she's going to talk more about the long-term care ombudsman program.
Thanks, Bria. That was great. Really good information. So welcome, everyone. It's great to be chatting with you today and sharing a little bit about the New York State Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. So basically, the key points of what we do are educating residents and family members, empowering the residents in long-term care facilities, and advocating for those residents. The Ombudsman Program's mission is to serve as advocates, as stated, and be a resource to older adults and persons with disabilities who are living in long-term care facilities. And what we mean by long-term care facilities are skilled nursing facilities, and that would also include the subacute section, which is known as rehab, adult care facilities, which is usually an assisted living facility, but the larger umbrella is the adult care facilities, and then also family type homes. So looking at the long-term care ombudsman program by the numbers, New York State approximately has 1,500 long-term care facilities. We in Western New York, Region 15, of which we are 4 counties, Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, Erie, and Niagara, we have 120 facilities in our region. Statewide, there's over 160,000 beds. Again, Western New York, Region 15, we have 14,000 beds. As mentioned, the facilities that we serve. And then also statewide, there's approximately 35 full-time staff and 15 part-time staff. They are funded by the Ombudsman Grant, and the Ombudsman Grant is a state grant that's provided to nonprofits who house or sponsor the various programs. But part of that 35 full-time folks is our state office, which is very important. We have 4 staff members there. And also, most importantly, we have an appointed state ombudsman, and her name is Claudette Royal. So that is in Albany. And then also we have, in addition, and also very important, is 250 certified volunteer ombudsmen that are working throughout the state to help advocate for residents. So here's looking at the state view of all of the regions. Our region is in red, and it shows the various agencies in which the long-term care ombudsman program is housed, and the number corresponds with the various regions. Most of them are in nonprofits. Only Region 12, which is Tompkins County and some other surrounding counties, is in one of the Office of Aging. So We actually in Region 15, just to point out, have a unique partnership with Center for Elder Law and Justice. They help us with reviewing discharge notices that come from the skilled nursing facilities. They also help with systems advocacy, not only in our region, but statewide, and assistance in communicating the regulations, which is what Bria is doing right now today. So also in all of the facilities, there is the poster in the New York State poster showing and promoting the program and making this visible to all residents, employees, family members who may be coming in for visits, so that they know where to reach out, and if they want to share a concern, something that they would like the Ombudsman program to work on, they would have a number to call. There where it says call locally, that is where the individual program puts in their program numbers. So those would be 15 different numbers throughout the state. And I think our number will be showing you at the end of the presentation. So responsibilities of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program was created under the Older Americans Act. And this act started the program in 1965. Well, actually, the Older Americans Act was created in 1965, but it wasn't until 1972 that there were 5 demonstration programs. And then from that, in 1978, there were programs in all states. And the state themselves could choose to whether they wanted that program to be all staff or whether they wanted it to be part staff and part volunteer. So New York State chose to have the volunteers within the facilities as well. So what we do is, again, investigate and resolve complaints. We also document those complaints. A lot of times people think when we're documenting a complaint that goes to DOH, but really that remains within the long-term care ombudsman program. So we document it and work on resolving, and we also document unresolved complaints just to have that record. We educate consumers and providers on residents' rights. So this could happen individually or in a group setting. We go out and do presentations for various groups on residents' rights and general information about the Ombudsman program. We advocate for quality care in long-term care facilities, and whether that's with, again, the individual and their individual care, or a more systemic look at what's going on within that facility. We promote the development of residence councils and family councils. So the ombudsmen are to have access to the long-term care facilities without any interference. So ombudsmen, unlike maybe what visitors have been going through, continue to have access and have continued to have access to facilities. We are to have access to residents and medical records with consent from that resident. Basically, we need consent from the resident or a legal representative if that resident does not have capacity in order to view their medical records related to a specific concern that the resident has raised. So the long-term care ombudsman program is always resident-centered. The resident is always the first person with whom the ombudsman discusses fully the complaint or the concern. The concern can come from anyone, basically. It could come from a facility staff, a daughter, a son, any family member, a friend, a legal representative. But it's always the role of the ombudsman to take that concern back to the resident and ask the resident if it's something that, first of all, is an issue for them, something that they are finding problematic in the facility. And then secondly, if they're willing to have us act on their behalf in order to help resolve that concern. And I guess I should say between those two things is we would want to educate the resident on how they might advocate for themselves as well. So the residents' wishes are the focus and priority of any action taken by the ombudsman, and we do not act unless it's with their permission. So during COVID and still in COVID, the program remains available to residents and family members. Early on, we provided facilities. Actually, the state office put together a letter on accessing the regional ombudsman office during COVID and how to do that, just to reinforce that we are still here and available. We expanded virtual communications, so made available when we could work it out, screen use with the resident, always phone and email, and interacting with residents and families regarding the various concerns. We continue complaint investigations and continue to provide information and referral assistance to individuals. And we continue seeing residents in facilities. So according to the CMS guidance, which Bria had referenced earlier, there's specific language in there about the Ombudsman Access. There's been, and the Older Americans Act, language about the Ombudsman Access, but I want to just point out that it also was reinforced by CMS guidance both in September of 2020 and then the most recently revised, which is November 12th, 2021. Nursing homes must provide the ombudsman with immediate access to any resident, and that's day and night. Yes, we have had ombudsmen going in at night if they need to check out a situation then. If an ombudsman is planning to see a resident who is on transmission-based precaution or quarantine, the resident and the ombudsman should be made aware by the facility of the risk of visiting, and the visit should take place in the resident's room. And of course, the ombudsman would adhere to any of the core principles or all of the core principles of COVID-19 infection prevention. So we would answer those initial screening questions often, such as travel, symptoms, exposure, and then do hand hygiene, general hand hygiene, wear the mask, and more PPE if that is what is needed. So here is the New York State Long-Term Care Ombudsman phone number and the website for more information and to find out the various regions and what the local phone numbers are there in order to contact your local ombudsman. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have some questions lined up here. So the first question is, can facilities still keep the doors locked?
Are they referring to when someone is entering the facility, like you have to buzz in to get into the facility?
I'm not sure if the person who asked that question wants to clarify. There we go.
Bria, yes, it looks like.
Okay. So I mean, the guidance doesn't talk on that specifically, but I would still think that they would be able to have you buzz in to get into the facility, just so they're able to screen all the visitors who are coming in and out of the facility.
Okay, and I just gave David, I just gave you permission to speak if you want to ask your question. David Ost, are you there? Let's see. Okay, we'll move on to the next question then. This is from Amanda. What happens when a facility says corporate is still not advising unrestricted visitation.
Would they be able to clarify as far as unrestricted visitation? Do they mean like that their visits are still being monitored in the facility? Or I'm not 100% clear.
Okay, does the person who, oh, that's Amanda Keogh. Amanda, do you want to clarify your specific situation? Okay, we can come back to that one.
If I may.
Yeah, go
Chair?
ahead, Lindsay. Yeah,
So I think what Amanda is asking or is seeing what's happening is potentially some nursing homes or their corporate aren't being forthcoming with residents and their families that visitation restrictions have been really lifted as of late. So my recommendation for that would be if you ever hear, whether as an ombudsman, resident, or family member advocate, you hear the reason being given is, well, corporate said X. My recommendation would be to see, so where is that in writing? Who at corporate can I speak with to address that issue? In addition, there is a federal requirement that all nursing homes have a grievance process. So I recommend that if the resident is concerned or has an issue with not being allowed access to their visitors, they submit a formal grievance to the nursing home and request a written response.
okay, thank you, Lindsay. Someone asked, what about the new Delta variant? Again, I'm not exactly sure what this is referring to.
I can just say that, I mean, you have the new Delta variant and the Omicron variant as well. But currently this is what CMS and Department of Health have as their current visitation guidelines. So they haven't put out any heightened guidelines that facilities need to be following. So as of right now, this is what facilities are allowed to do regarding visitation.
Okay, thank you, Bria. We have a question from Linda who says, is it correct that residents still have the right to refuse to be tested?
Lindsay, I'm actually not 100% sure with that. I'm not sure if you.
Yeah, you can't force anybody to do anything, but what staff can do is reapproach the resident, educate the resident, and inform the resident of what happens if they refuse to be tested. So if that means the resident could potentially be in isolation for a couple of days to monitor for symptoms. However, there really needs to be ongoing dialogue, and each specific situation is different. If someone's saying no, there's usually a reason for that, and staff need to take the time to really fully assess why the person is saying no, whether it's to be tested or other care and services.
Okay, and another question is a facility required to offer a resident council meeting or some kind of resident council meeting?
So the facility is not required, but the residents and families are allowed to have resident and family council. So if that's something that the resident wants or the family wants, I would recommend reaching out to the activities director or social worker or someone at the facility so that they can have those council meetings.
And I would add that that's something that the Ombudsman program can advocate for with the facility.
Okay, and then the last written question on here says, is this all applicable to assisted living facilities as well?
So this is not applicable to assisted living facilities. The guidelines for assisted living facilities have not been updated since July. So currently those visitation policies are a little bit more strict actually than the current nursing home regulations. So what we recommend is reaching out to your local politician and just stating, that you don't agree with these current guidelines, as well as filing a complaint with the New York State Department of Health assisted or adult care facility hotline.
Okay, a few more for you, Bria and Lisa. Okay, this one says, my facility is no longer checking temperatures for visitors at the door. It's now on the honor system. Is this following new regulations?
So the new regulations just state that the facility is still screening. So if you're still like filling out a sheet and saying that, you're attesting that you don't have a temperature, that you haven't been in close contact with someone that has tested positive for COVID-19, that you haven't traveled internationally, if they're still doing that screening, then I think it's still following the current guidelines.
Okay. And here's one more. The husband is in a nursing home in a semi-private room. Why can't the spouse bring the meal for the two of them to eat together if they're both fully vaccinated?
So I know that visits can occur in the resident room. I'm not 100% sure as far as eating though in the room together. Lindsay, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. So so resident rights are always a balance between all of the residents. So there could be a potential concern with the roommates and potential droplets spreading. So if the roommate is not in the room while the spouses are looking to eat together, then that should be okay. But it really is case specific, and I would recommend that the person reach out to their ombudsman program for individual assistance there.
Okay, are there any additional questions? All right. Seeing none. Oh, wait, something else just came in. Okay, to follow up on that question, Lindsay, so it's not an issue with bringing food in? She'd like some further clarification on that.
There's no COVID restriction prohibiting that, but infection protocols have to be followed. I would say that you should be able to bring in food. And if that's not happening, to contact the Ombudsman program for individual advocacy. And if the issue is not being resolved, file a complaint with the Department of Health. And with respect to food, I would have further questions. So is the resident not eating the food that the facility is preparing? Are there issues there? But I would recommend contacting the Ombudsman program, and I would also recommend submitting a grievance with the nursing home and requesting a formal written response.
Okay, great job, Bria and Lisa. Certainly, if there are other questions that come up, please feel free to contact us. Bria and Lisa, I don't know if either one of you want to put your emails in the chat. You can also call Center for Elder Law and Justice, and we have the contact information in there for Lindsay if you do need confirmation of attendance on this webinar, if you're in the Ombudsman program. And lastly, we did put the survey link in there for your feedback on today's presentation. And we encourage you to fill that out. That's very helpful to us. And we will keep you informed about future programs. Anything else, guys?
Nope, that's it. I just put my email in the chat. So if anyone would like to email me with any further questions, or if they would like a copy of the slides, feel free to reach out.
All right, thank you all very much for attending, and we hope this was helpful. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.